Today I'm gonna talk about information design in allocation with costly verification. This is a joint work with Yi Chunchen from National University of Singapore and Xiang Qianyang from Hunan University. So as you can see in the title, actually this paper is a combination of two literatures, allocation with costly verification and information design. So I'm gonna first explain the first term allocation with costly verification, and then add in an information designer, and then talk about the information design problem. So we consider the kind of allocation problems in the style of Ben-Power, Steichel, and Lippmann. So here are some examples in their paper or in the real world. You can imagine we have 4 examples here. You can imagine that an economics school may recruit a PhD student from its undergraduates. A venture capital firm may consider whether to fund a startup from a set of competing ones or not. And after a disaster, a government may consider whether to build a new hospital in one of several towns that suffered from the disaster, like an earthquake. Okay. And the last example is that we are quite familiar with this one. So a research funding agency may consider whether to support one of the several competing researchers or not. Okay. For those kind of allocation problems, we have a bunch of features, 3 main features. First of all, the principal has an object to be allocated to one or more agents. And the 3 features are as follows. First, agents have private information. So like in the research funding application problem, we have private information about our own research ability. And the second feature, there's no monetary transfer. So we cannot bid for a research funding like in an auction. Okay. This is quite different from the standard literature of mechanism design with transfer. Okay. And the third feature is that costly verification is available. So the principal can pay a cost to learn the private information, the private information of the agents. Okay. So that's why it's called allocation with costly verification. And by the way, without monetary transfer. Okay. So in this kind of allocation problems, we consider the role played by an information designer. Again, we use the same set of examples to illustrate who should be the information designer in the allocation problem. In the PhD student recruitment problem, the information designer could be the student's thesis supervisor. Okay. And for the venture capital firm allocation problem, both the venture capital firm and the startup may rely on the information that is disclosed by a rating firm, a consulting firm, auditing firm, etc. Okay. And in the disaster allocation problem, both the government and the citizens in towns may rely on the town council to get information about the value of that allocation. And then lastly, the problem we are familiar with, both the research funding agency and the researchers rely on the external referees' viewpoint to decide what would be the allocation value. Okay.
So, a quick question. So, is the information designer is not necessarily the one who decide to allocate the resources, right?
Yeah, thank you. Good question. So the information designer may be an independent person who is not the principal.
A third party.
A third party, yes. So we have basically we have 3 people in the model. Information designer who designs the information that is received by both the principal and the agent. Okay. So let's see how the information designer may affect the 3 features of the allocation problem. So for the first feature, agents have private information, which is a signal that is learned from the information designer. So like in the PhD student example, the undergraduate student may not be very sure about his own research ability, but his thesis supervisor can influence the agent's perception of his own research ability. Okay, it's a signal. And the second feature, there's no material transfer. This one is not affected by information design. And the third one, costly verification of any agent's signal is available. So when the principal pays a cost, the principal learns the private signal of the agent, not the real research ability. The real research ability is unknown to everyone. Okay. So given those examples, let's see how we can formally model the features. Okay. We consider a single agent model first. Extensions to the multiple agent case will be discussed in the end. Okay. Some preliminaries first. Okay. Agent type is denoted by small t, and the small t follows a distribution f, which is a distribution on a set capital T. Okay, this capital T set is an interval on the real line. So agent's type is a one-dimensional type. Okay, and agent's utility is simply the probability small p of getting the good. So agent only cares about whether he can get the good or not. Now for the principal has a reservation value for that good, denoted by capital R, reservation value. And if the principal decides to allocate the good to the agent, the principal gets an allocation payoff of T minus R. So small t here is the allocation payoff to the allocation value to the principal, and T minus R is the net value of allocation. Okay, those are the basic ingredients of the model. And now information. So we assume that neither the principal nor the agent knows the distribution F or T. So no one knows the underlying distribution F, and no one knows the realization small t. No one, I mean, neither the principal nor the agent. And we assume that the information designer knows capital F, the distribution. But the information designer does not have information about the realization, small t. Okay. So in the example of a PhD student, okay, the undergraduate supervisor knows the distribution of this student's research ability based on his experience, years of experience, and years of communication with this student. But the supervisor does not know the real research ability. But the supervisor can push the student to different directions to different extent, so that the student can complete an undergraduate thesis. And this undergraduate thesis may reveal some information about the real research ability. Okay. But that's what we are going to talk about next. The key information here is that we assume the information designer knows capital F, the distribution, but not the realization. Okay. And the principal and the agent may receive some information from the information designer. So here for the agent may learn a private signal S about the true type T. Okay. And the principal may learn a distribution capital G of the signal S. So capital G here is only the distribution of signal, not the distribution of the real type. Okay. We can imagine that this capital G distribution is designed through some joint distribution between the real type and the signal. So for example, joint distribution H. And the marginal distribution on types is consistent with the underlying distribution F. And the marginal distribution of a signal is actually the signal distribution G to be designed. So we can have a joint distribution in mind at this stage. Okay. And then we can use some results from the literature to make the information design problem concrete. Okay. So according to the results of Rosler and Zentis, and of course Blackwell, what kind of information could the information designer design? It's actually the set of marginal distributions of unbiased signals. So when we consider signals, we only consider unbiased signals, and we can focus on the marginal distributions without explicitly model the joint distribution. Okay, and the set of marginal distributions of unbiased signals is actually the set of mean preserving contractions of the underlying distribution F. Okay, mean preserving contraction can be read as I read in the second order stochastic dominance sense. So which kind of signal distributions could the information designer use? It's actually those dominated by capital F in the second order sense. So the
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, please.
So here it seems that the S and the T are in the same space. Is that assumption or is implied by some result that you can reduce the space of the S to the same space of the T?
Oh, yes, actually, it's exactly this this result we are talking about that implies that the domain of S is actually the same as the domain of T.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because signal is just... Sorry. Does the agent knows distribution about G, distribution G?
Of course, yeah.
Okay.
So the designer designs the distribution G of signal. The agent knows the distribution and the realization.
Okay.
Okay, and the principal learns only the distribution G. Okay. So we can simplify the information design problem into the choice of marginal distributions of unbiased signals. Okay, into the choice of mean preserving contractions of F. Okay. And we have to keep the cost verification part in mind. Okay. If the principal pays a cost C to learn, she can learn the realized signal S. If she doesn't pay the cost, she only knows the distribution G. Okay. And the allocation payoff to the principal actually depends on whether the principal pays the cost. Okay. If the principal pays the cost and check the agent, then the allocation payoff is S minus C minus the reservation value R. Otherwise, if the principal does not check the agent, then the payoff is just S minus R if the good is allocated. Okay. And here, the allocation payoff is calculated using the signal S instead of underlying value T. This can be justified because signal S is unbiased. Okay. So when the principal cares only about the expected value, using S is the same as using T. Okay. So this is the entire model. Any question about the model?
So here the cost C does not depend on the qualities of the G. For example, if you have a higher variance for the G, it does not influence the cost C, right?
Yes, yes. The cost actually is exogenous. It's a fixed number. Something like if you send some people to the town, if you spend some time on revealing the materials, and then you can find out what the type or the signal is, what the signal is. So this kind of cost is fixed. It doesn't depend on the signal or the type.
Thank you.
What is the payoff of the information designer?
Okay. We will talk about this later. But we can illustrate the information designer's preference in the example for the PhD student recruiting. Okay. Like the supervisor, the information designer's payoff. Okay, the information designer may favor the student to maximize the probability of the students getting the PhD position. Alternatively, the information designer may favor the department and design information so that the department can get a high quality student with the largest probability. Okay. So the information designer's objective may be different in different scenarios, and we will talk about 3 possible objectives later.
So in the scenarios that you talk about, that the payoff has nothing to do with the cost C. So in that sense, that the cost is totally wasted, right?
Yes, in that case, the cost is wasted.
Okay. Okay.
And the benefit is to improve the ex post allocation efficiency. Okay. Okay, so we have a information design problem followed by an mechanism design problem. And let's first look at the mechanism design problem. So kind of a backward induction, given the signal distribution G. So this part is just the simplification of a BDL's model. So if you are familiar with that one, then this part will be quite easy. Let's first introduce the mechanism, and particularly we care about the direct mechanism. So in a direct mechanism, usually the agent is asked to report the private information signal S. And after the report of the signal, this agent may be checked and may not be checked. So there are two possibilities. If we consider the probability of being checked, then it's a continuum. Okay, the probability of being checked is denoted by Q of S. So that one depends on the reported signal S. So two cases. If the agent is not checked, then the principal knows nothing about the realization of the signal. The principal's decision can only be made based upon the distribution. So there would be a distribution and the reported signal. So there would be a allocation probability, assignment probability denoted by P not checked of S. So this one doesn't rely on the truth telling or lying factor of the agent. Okay. And when the agent is checked with probability Q of S, there would be two possible checking outcomes, truth telling or lying. And based on the result of BDL, when the agent is checked and found truth telling, then the conditional assignment probability has to be 1, so that the agent has the incentive to tell the truth. Exactly. And when the agent is checked and found lying, the conditional assignment probability has to be 0, so that the agent will be punished when the agent is lying. Okay, and given the scenarios, we can see that the assignment probability, the total assignment probability, actually consists of 2 parts. The first part is just the being checked and being allocated part. So it's Q of S, which is the checking and allocating probability. And the second part is the assignment probability without being checked. So 1 minus Q is the probability of not being checked. Okay. So the weighted average is the weighted sum. The weighted sum is the total assignment probability given the report S. Okay. So
if an agent has been checked, then he tells truth and he eventually will go the allocation.
Yes, whoever is checked will be allocated.
Okay.
Okay, be allocated the good. Okay, so when we are familiar with this fake timeline, we can introduce a direct mechanism, actually a simplified direct mechanism, because we have used the simplification result to get the 1 and the 0. Okay. So according to the results of BDL, we have a revelation principle. Sorry, there's a typo. Revelation principle. And we can focus on direct mechanisms, and particularly we can focus on the simplified direct mechanisms, which consists of 2 parts: the checking probability, the checking probability function Q, and the total assignment probability function P. There's a natural restriction on the 2 functions, that's P should be greater than Q. Because if you look at the equation, P is Q plus something else, right? So P should be greater than Q. P is the total assignment probability. And the principal would design an optimal simplified direct mechanism to allocate the good, and the mechanism design problem is formulated in this way. So the designer chooses the P function and the Q function to maximize the expected payoff. Okay? And the expectation is taken according to the distribution G. So look at the objective function. It has 2 parts: the allocation payoff S minus R times the total assignment probability P. And the second part is the checking cost. So checking cost is C and checking probability is Q, then yeah, the second part is the checking cost. And the constraints, okay. So the first 2 constraints are quite standard. They just say that the P and Q are both probability functions. So they are between the values are between 0 and 1. And the third constraint is the one we just mentioned. Q should not be greater than P. Okay? And the last constraint is the incentive compatibility constraint. It says that, of course, it says that truth telling is better than lying. Okay, so for the left-hand side, P of S is the total assignment probability under truth telling. Okay? And if the agent does not tell the truth and reports something else like S prime, then the agent will only get the assignment probability conditional on not being checked, right? If the agent is checked, then the conditional assignment probability is 0. So if the agent lies, he can only get the part conditional on not being checked, which is the PNC part, right? So the lying probability, the probability of getting the good conditional on lying to be S prime is just the P minus Q. Okay. So any question about this mechanism design problem? Good.
So you are going to endogenize this distribution G.
Yes. Oh, okay. The distribution G appears here in taking expectation. Yeah.
And subject to the condition you just mentioned, the Blackwell dominance condition. Just the second,
Sorry, I didn't hear you clearly.
So if the principal is a designer, so and he is going to choose this G subject to the condition. You
Yes,
just mentioned.
if the principal is the designer, yes. But we would mainly talk about the case where the principal is not the information designer.
Okay.
They are separate, they are different person. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So here we list the information designer's problems. As I just mentioned, the information designer may have different objectives. She may favor the principal. She may also it's also possible to favor the agent. Okay? So the first problem we are going to consider is the agent optimal information design problem. So the information designer favors the agent and maximizes the probability of the agents getting the good, okay, by choosing signal distribution G. And this problem has a constraint. Okay? The probability of getting the good has to be derived from an optimal mechanism in the mechanism design problem. Okay? It's like a sequential problem. Okay, we have a backward induction, and we get the optimal mechanism in the later stage, and then in the first stage, the information designer takes that optimal mechanism into consideration and maximizes the probability of agents getting the good. This is the agent optimal information design problem. And the second problem we are going to consider is the principal worst information design problem. Okay. So the information designer chooses signal distribution G to minimize the principal's payoff from an optimal mechanism. Okay. And this problem sounds weird at the first glance, but this can be justified. So why should we care about this kind of principal worst information design problem? Because it can be used to study the robust mechanism design problem. Okay. The robust mechanism design problem is in the story as follows. So the principal wants to design an optimal mechanism, but the principal does not know the precise distribution of the agent's type. There may be a lot of possibilities, and the principal cares about the worst possible payoff. So this kind of a mechanism design problem is called the robust ones. Okay, so this is the principal worst information design problem. And the last one we are going to consider is the principal optimal information design problem. Okay, this one is quite easy to understand. The information designer just choose signal distribution G to maximize the principal's payoff.
Is it guaranteed that these three problems have a solution? Because you're taking the max over I guess it's an uncompact set, the GF?
Yes, it's guaranteed ex post. Actually, we found solutions so that the solution exists.
Okay.
We didn't prove the existence at the beginning.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna study these three kinds of information design problems. And here is an overview of the. So let's see how those three information design problems can be solved. And actually you can see here that those three problems has a common feature. They have a mechanism design problem in the second stage, okay? So we need to solve the mechanism design problem first, given the designed signal distribution G. And this is the mechanism design problem. And this problem is the simplification of BDL's original one because we assume there is only one agent here. Okay. And the solution, we can just borrow from the BDL's paper. Okay. The solution relies on the definition of a threshold. We define a threshold as star minus C implicitly by the equation here. So the left-hand equation says that the expectation of a signal. Actually, calculating the expectation using the distribution G is the same as using F, right? Because the signal is unbiased. So the left-hand side is just the mean tap or the mean signal. And the right-hand side is something depends on the distribution G and the checking cost C. We don't have time to explain the intuition of the right-hand side. You just need to know that it depends on the distribution G and the checking cost C. Okay? And from the equation, just superficially, we can see that the threshold, S star increases in C. So when the checking cost is high, this threshold is high. And S star is increasing in the distribution G in the first order sense. So for example, when G has a larger mean, then the threshold is larger. Okay, here is the solution of the mechanism design problem. BDL says that the following favor agent mechanism is optimal, and it is essentially the unique optimal mechanism. This is just a special case of BDL's solution because we have only one agent. Okay. Here is the mechanism. If S star minus C, the threshold, is greater than R, which means either checking is very costly or the agent's distribution is quite good in the first order sense, the agent receives the good without being checked. Okay. In the other case, if S star minus C is smaller than R, then the agent's distribution is not so good or the checking cost is not so high, then it's possible that the good is allocated after checking the agent. Okay. And after checking, the agent will be found lying or truth-telling, and the allocation rule will be the same as we explained in the model part. But here, let's see how what the checking probabilities are. If the reported signal S is small, in the sense that S minus C is smaller than R, then there's no need to check the agent because the reported signal is so small, and there's no need to allocate the good because the allocation value has to be smaller than the reservation value. So in this case, the principal returns the good. And if the reported signal is high enough so that it's worthwhile to check the agent, then the agent will be checked. And the agent will be found truth-telling on equilibrium path. And the agent will get the good. Okay. So this is the optimal mechanism from BDL. And we will directly use the result. Here is the payoff calculated from this optimal mechanism. So if the threshold is so high, S star minus C is greater than R, then the agent receives the good without being checked, which means that the principal's payoff is just the mean minus the reservation value. So this is a net payoff. If the threshold is not so high, means that the agent may be checked. And the allocation depends on the reported signal and the checking outcome. Okay. And in each realization, so that S is large enough, the principal gets a payoff of S minus C minus R, as we have seen earlier. Okay. And for every signal that's larger than r plus c, the payoff has the same form. So we have the integral here. We will see the term r plus c frequently later. It's from here. We compare the signal realization and r plus c. Okay. Any question about the mechanism design solution? Okay, so let's proceed. Given the solution for the mechanism to the mechanism design problem, we consider the agent optimal information design problem first. Like in the solution, we consider two cases. If there exists some signal distribution such that the corresponding threshold is large enough, then the agent gets the good with probability 1, right? So any such signal distribution actually maximizes the agent's probability, maximizes the agent's utility. So must be agent optimal. Okay. And the second case, if for all signal distributions that are in the set of feasible ones, the threshold is smaller than R. Okay. Then we need to solve another problem, maximizing the probability of agents getting the good. Because in the second case, the agent gets the good only if the agent reports a high signal and is checked and found truth timing. So signal has to be greater than R plus C so that the agent can be checked and allocated the good.
Can I ask a question here?
Yes, sure, please.
So here the R does not depend on the G, right?
Yes, R is a fixed number, reservation value.
Is it because that the principle is risk neutral that you can have this result?
Yeah, actually, yeah, yes. So our results depends on the risk neutrality of the principle.
Okay.
Like in calculating the payoff at the very beginning. Yeah. So, okay, well, here 1 minus G of R plus C is the probability of the agent of getting the good. And the superscript minus of G actually means the approximation, I don't know how to see it, means that the left-hand set or right-hand set probability. So including or excluding the point R plus C. You can see it from the definition here. Okay. So this is the information design problem. And we should care about how information design may affect the threshold, because given the underlying distribution capital F, we have a threshold. Given any designed information G, we have a threshold. So how information design may affect the threshold is important in analyzing the information design problem here. This is how. So when we choose an mean preserving contraction, the threshold will be pushed up. Okay. So S star is greater than T star if we define T star as that special type defined by underlying distribution F. So mean preserving contraction will push up the special type. So here is the solution.
So what is T star?
T star is okay. You see the definition of S star using the equation.
Right.
T star is the special type calculated by defined by the distribution F instead of a G.
Okay.
Okay. So we have an intuition here. The principal wants to push up the threshold as much as possible so that the agent can get the good with as large probability as possible, right? And here is a characterization of the solution to the agent optimal information design problem. Okay. Two cases. If the mean type or the mean signal is larger than the reservation value, then we claim that there exists a signal distribution G such that the threshold is high enough. In particular, non-information is agent optimal. So non-information satisfies that inequality. So that threshold is high enough. Non-information means that the information designer just tell the principal that the mean is as such and nothing else to tell you. Okay. Second case, if the mean is small, then some information G is agent optimal if and only if that distribution G has an item R plus C with some probability. Okay, please do not read it now. The verbal description is that the information designer will pull information above some threshold S1, some signal threshold S1, and the information will be pulled at the point R plus C. And below S1, the principal learns the original distribution. Okay? So in particular, the following information is agent optimal. So before S1, the signal distribution is the same as the original distribution F. And from S1 to the upper bound, so above S1, all the probability mass is concentrated at the point R plus C. Okay. What's the idea? The information designer wants to maximize the probability of the agent of getting the good. And the agent can get the good only if the signal is above R plus C. So the information designer wants to make that probability of signal being greater than R plus C as large as possible. And concentrating all the probability mass above S1 is the largest extent that the information designer can do so. Okay, so here is a figure to illustrate that solution. Okay. And this is not the unique agent optimal information. There's another one, the blue one. So above the threshold, the cutoff S1, information is pulled, and below S1, as long as the mean preserving contraction condition is satisfied, the details are not important. It doesn't affect the agent's payoff or the principal's payoff. Okay. And we can calculate the principal's payoff on the agent optimal information, like using the right information, G hat. Okay. And here is the principal's payoff. If the mean is large enough, then allocating the good with probability 1 will give the principal a net payoff of mean minus R. Okay. If the mean is small, then because every signal above S1 is pulled at R plus C, even if the good is allocated to the agent, the principal gets a payoff of 0. Right? The payoff is some integral of S minus C minus R. Okay. So this is the principal's payoff under the agent optimal information. And the next one, principal worst information. Again, two cases. If the mean is large enough, then a distribution is principal worst if and only if the threshold derived by the designed signal distribution is larger than R. And in particular, making the signal distribution the least informative is principal worst. And when the mean is small, then G is principal worst if and only if the support has an upper bound R plus C. Okay. In particular, again, this is the same as the first case. Making the distribution least informative is principal worst. Okay. So given the result here, we can calculate the principal's payoff under the principal worst information, which is the same as in the agent optimal case, right? Which is the same as in the agent optimal case. So it's not a coincidence. We have a formal result like we promised. We can show that any agent optimal information is principal worst. Okay. So even if the objectives are not directly comparable, one about probability, one about value, we have a strong connection between the solutions to the two problems. And the converse is not true. We have a counterexample. The non-information is usually principal worst, but not agent optimal. Okay. So this kind of result is something similar with the result in the bilateral trade setting, like in Rosa and Zentis. There's a seller and there's a buyer in that setting. And intuitively, anything that favors the seller has to hurt the buyer because they split the same surplus. Okay. But here we have a kind of a halfly similar result, but the intuition is very different. Because in our allocation problem, the principal and the agent actually have overlapped interest. The principal wants to allocate the good to the highest signal guy, and the agent wants to get the good with as large probability as possible. So the interests are overlapped. Okay. Okay, so this is the first important implication from the characterizations. And the second one about robust mechanism design. As I promised, you will see the maximum inequality here. The upper problem is the principal worst information design problem. And the second one is the robust mechanism design problem. And we have a mathematical result, maximum inequality. So the maximum value is no more than the min-max value. So this means that the principal worst information design problem will give us a payoff that's the upper bound of the principal's payoff from any robust mechanism. And this is upper bound. And we can achieve this upper bound using a robust mechanism. Just look at the payoff here. You can imagine what the robust mechanism could be. The robust mechanism only depends on the mean of the distribution and does not depend on any other details of the distribution. If the mean is greater than the reservation value, then allocate the good. Otherwise, do not allocate the good. This is a mechanism, and it's robust. It doesn't depend on the details of the distribution. And it turns out to be the optimal robust mechanism. So here is the formal result. And we can actually compare this result with the benchmark optimal mechanism from BDL. The robust mechanism uses the mean as a reference, but the original optimal mechanism uses the special type T star as a reference. And those two mechanisms will deliver same payoff to the principal in some cases, and in some other cases, the payoffs will be a bit different. And lastly, we characterize the solution to the principal optimal information design problem. And we don't have time to go through the details. So here is the example. So full information, meaning that disclosing the underlying distribution F is principal optimal in either case. Okay. We still discuss two cases, but this special solution is the same for the two cases. Okay. And I'm running out of time. So for the multiple agent case, we just listed the result. So for the agent optimal information design, the solution is very similar to the single agent one. By the way, in the multiple agent case, agent optimality means that the agent's total probability of obtaining the good is maximized. Okay? So this one is similar to the single agent case. And one example to illustrate something new. So if we have two agents and the information design is possible, then under some agent optimal information, both agents can be made better off. Okay? Under some other agent optimal information, one agent is made better off, but the other gets worse off. So we sacrifice one agent for the benefit of the other. Both cases are possible. And in the example, the two agent optimal informations actually deliver different principal payoffs. So this one actually has an implication, meaning that with multiple agents, an agent optimal information is not necessarily principal worst. We don't know principal worst yet, but we can claim that agent optimal information is not necessarily principal worst because the two agent optimal informations deliver different payoffs to the principal. At least one of them is not the worst one. So, okay. So this is about the agent optimal information. And the principal worst information and robust mechanism design is largely the same as before with more involved proofs. Okay. In the robust mechanism design result, it's actually robust in another sense, as the result can be applied in different settings, variations of BDL's paper. And lastly, for the principal optimal information design, the result for the multiple agent case is actually similar to the single agent case. Disclosing the underlying distribution F is principal optimal. Okay. So basically nothing new here in this part. And maybe let me stop here. This is a summary of the result, the same as the overview page. Any questions?
So you in the last slide you said that you allow for correlations between the GIS. So in the current
yes.
setting, the signals are independent, right?
Yes, in the paper when we show the result, we just say that the signals are designed independently, but we can allow for correlation. Okay, the reason is that allowing for correlation will just make the principle worse than in the principle worst case, right? Because the feasible signals, the set is gets larger, so the principle can be swirled up further, which means that the upper bound is pushed down. But the robust mechanism we propose actually can achieve that higher upper bound, that original upper bound, which means that this correlation cannot really push down the upper bound.